All right, how's that look?
Perfect.
Good enough? Okay, so yeah, certainly the title here is around creating your investor deck, and I guess what I'm going to do is caveat that slightly and say, hey, even if you're not planning to raise outside funding, I think that this is still valuable because putting together a deck like this, I think really helps you understand your business, right? And some of the major aspects of building the business are pretty critical to hear. So you know I would at least hope that you don't shut down if you already made a decision that you're not going to go off and raise money. So I'll start with that. And now I'd also say that I think a couple of you folks have experience raising money. So please keep me honest. I'm going to speak to this through an investor lens. I'm involved in a couple of different funds here, both domestically and then internationally. So I'll try to give examples where I can of what I see, and certainly the creation of the slides here, is based on some of the let's call it the best practice lessons learned. So the intent here, over the next little bit is really to talk about one, the purpose of the investor deck. So we'll start with that. We'll get into some best practice lessons learned, and then I'll go through some examples of actual slides here. All right, so we're all on the same page. Just want to make sure we're touching on investor decks. There's a variety of different decks that you can create. Some are great, the demo days, pitch competitions, etc. We're not talking about those today. I would, I guess offer up in some cases, those are great practice locations for you to hone your messages. So they have a particular purpose. I was, I think, talking to Joey just a few days ago. She has a client that, she's looking for those folks to move on from pitch competitions to actual, spend a little more time with investors, right? So there you go. At some point in time, right, there's maybe you want to move on for that. But I mean, the point is, you're going to go through some of these things. There may be certain steps that you want to take. Whoever you may happen to be pitching to, just make sure that that you're thinking about that. And so today really the focus is around the investor pitches. We're not doing customer pitches, right? We're not doing demo days. We're not doing anything like that. Okay, so I'm going to start with, hey, there really is no blueprint, but I believe just about 30 seconds ago I said, hey, we'll go through some slides here to use for your pitch. So I'm going to call that a guide, maybe. All right. So the idea here, right, is that as you are pitching investors, I, as an investor, I see numerous pitches every day, right? I get pitch decks just all the time. I probably look through 2, 3, maybe 4 a day. And so in my mind, right, the intent of the deck here really is not necessarily to really sell me on making an investment. It really is just to gain the interest level so that we're going to engage a little bit more and then have that conversation. You're able to actually take me through what you're working on. And I would say that the reason why I don't believe that there really is a true blueprint to which you ought to be pitching is that your story as an entrepreneur is different than anybody else that's on this call. And so as you think about the market, your particular solution and how it fits into that, how you present it, right? What you get excited about, why you're even on this journey is very different from anybody else. There's some fundamental things I think you need to convey, but the method in which you convey them, is widely varied. So to me, right, going through this and really tailoring the slides to you as an entrepreneur, as well as the particular investor that you're talking to, is pretty critical. All right. So before we go too much further here, I know we all love talking about COVID, so I'm gonna throw up a slide here about COVID. But I'd like you to say or think about this a little bit maybe broader than just COVID, right? And really think about it in the sense of changing market dynamics. Gosh, Tyra Global last year, right? 2 years ago, they used to go in and do diligence in a day. They got beat up last year, and I'm not entirely sure they're going to continue on with that particular business model. Okay, what was that the result of? Well, it wasn't necessarily COVID. It had to do with a lot of market dynamics and how those are changing. You know, so really the purpose behind this slide is, yeah, COVID had a big impact on venture capital. Prior to COVID, you probably had to go meet, in person and pitch in person and do a lot of in-person work. Certainly now the video capabilities, the way we typically do, investor pitches is that we'll go through and have some interaction with the founders before we actually look at a pitch from them. So, review the pitch deck. We'll do a little bit of diligence before we actually, go ahead and talk to those folks. In many cases, the first pitch would be remote. However, I don't know any investment that we've made yet where we haven't met the founders in person first. So that's still there. Okay. But getting back to the slide here, when I think about the changes in the market, I believe, right, that if we're not meeting in person, then kind of the diligence on the team is a little bit harder. However, getting experts on the phone, et cetera, is a little bit easier. So there's kind of an upside and a downside here. When you think about pitching in person versus over video, be thinking about what the dynamics are, right? Do you have the the proper font, right? Are there deck colors in there? Can you read this? And things like that, right? So just be very thoughtful on how you put this together. The actual purpose, right? So to me, right, the deck really should create enough interest so that whoever is reading it would say, hey, wait a second, I want to have a follow-on discussion with you, right? So in many cases, the best way to do that is to tell a story, right, and make that connection with the particular investors. In many cases, that story that you're going to craft is going to resonate with folks a lot more than a series of statistics. If you think through the impact of a medical device out in the marketplace, that can be significant. If you're, solving cancer, right? I mean, that's a big deal. But if you're just going to hit me with statistics, versus some sort of story, then it may not necessarily, sink in as well, and we may not connect as well. So I guess my point is, right, is kind of go through, talk to that story, include the slides, make it all come together. Think about what's happening in the marketplace today, right? So what's top of mind for folks? What are we thinking about? Who's doing what? If you look at the headlines, how can you include those in your conversation, right? Because I get up every morning, right, and read the digital newspaper. And so I'm constantly, right, being exposed to stuff, and that's what I'm thinking about for that particular day. And what I would say is that as you pitch the investors, make sure that you go through and have a chance to communicate your entire story from beginning to end. If you are ever at a point, right, where for whatever reason you're running out of time or whatever that happens to be, just be very, I guess, cognizant of trying to finish out that story, because if something, if there's a loose end there or whatever that happens to be, to me, I think about that as risk. Risk is bad from an investment standpoint, so less likely to be able to continue on with the conversation here. I think y'all, right, in medical device life sciences, you're in a really good space to be able to really use stories then to communicate what you're trying to accomplish, and to be able to draw in the potential investors. So a little bit more here about the purpose. When I think about it, after we've had the conversation, I ought to be able to understand your business, and I ought to be able to actually take that understanding of your business, turn around, talk to one of my partners and say, boy, Maria is doing this, and very clearly communicate what that means. If I can't do that, then I think you right, as a business is really going to struggle, with investors to be able to say, gosh, I'm going to invest in this particular company, this particular product, whatever that happens to be. I mean, it just essentially means, right, you didn't connect with me. I don't understand what you're doing, and I cannot communicate this to any partners or advocate for it, right, internally with these folks. We have a portfolio of opportunities out there that we're constantly reviewing. And if I can't make a good case internally, then chances of getting funded is very, very low. Okay. So anyways, that's kind of my suggestion here, is to make sure that, hey, not only do I understand your product, but I understand your business, right? And so it goes well beyond just the product. Products are cool, technology's cool. I get it, I love it. However, I need to understand the business and be able to communicate the business, right? I have everybody in life, right, looks at these opportunities with a different lens. And in many cases, folks are, thinking about it from their background and a business experience. Maybe they've been entrepreneurs, they've gone through. So they're always constantly thinking about things, and they're going to be asking questions about that. And if I'm not able to really communicate what the business level is, then we kind of get stuck and, not likely to progress and get invested in, and things like that. So as a part of that, right, while you're pitching your business, I would recommend, right, one, understanding what their investment thesis is, who have they invested in previously, what resonates with them. If at all possible, if there's folks in their portfolio that you can talk to, that's great. Figure that out, and then try to connect with them. In many cases, I'll probably, think up a series of questions before we actually go into the pitch session. And I'll have a half dozen things there. And over the course of me asking those questions, I'm laying my cards on the table about what I think, at least initially, the biggest risks are. And so to me, right, if you're able to then understand, hey, wait a second, Tim's asking questions all about, go-to-market strategy, right? Who's your economic buyer? That's what he happens to be interested in. Maybe I get the rest of the story, right? I get the technology, I get your manufacturing strategy, I get your IP strategy. It is all about go-to-market strategy. I need to understand that, and that's what I'm asking questions about. I would 100%, take what you're getting from the investors as far as feedback, whether it's questions or, straight up comments or suggestions, and then tailor your pitch based on what you're hearing. And to me, some of the best pitches that I've been involved in, right, are folks that yeah, hey, I've got a slide deck of 20 slides that I want to go over, but you know what, Tim, you don't understand X, Y, and Z. You keep asking these dumb questions around this. And so clearly I need to communicate better with you, because it's not getting through your thick skull, right? And so I'm going to slow down, and I'm going to pitch this, and I'm going to, really dumb it down for you. And so, to me, right, that's of course very helpful, because that way I don't have to, verbally state the fact that I'm stupid and have folks, slow down. So it's good for me anyways. So anyways, there you go. And read their faces, right? I see a lot of you kind of sitting here now, very stone faced, so it's hard for me to get feedback on this, but there you go. So yeah, exactly, Scott, I love it. So I mean, sometimes maybe no, I don't do that with investors, you mean with entrepreneurs, but you could, right? Kind of sit there and mess with them a little bit. But read that, right? I mean, certainly over video it's a lot harder. Back in the day, I mean, when there were conference calls, it was even harder than it is today. But certainly pay attention, right, to folks, and are they leaning into the conversation? Are they excited about it? Are they, playing on their phones, whatever that happens to be? So, when I think back to some of the situations I've been in, where folks start starting to say, hey, I got it, I got it, I got it. And you'll get that a lot from investors. That means speed it up, move on, right? And just, go with them. So think about that a little bit here. A couple of slides here on best practices. And, then I promise we'll get into the actual kind of a slide deck overview, so a guide on that journey. So, I think I mentioned before, right, around, hey, really understand what do they invest in. I get these slide decks from folks, that are consumer products in crypto, and nowhere in our investment thesis do we talk about any of that. And in fact, we always talk about B2B products, right? In particular market verticals. And I would tell you that, I get these things and it's frustrating to me to have to sort through this when I say very clearly, these folks don't understand what we invest in. They didn't spend 30 seconds to go to the website to figure out what our thesis is or do any sort of background. So, they get dumped pretty quickly. The next thing I would say is, as you think about who you're talking to, can you use industry terminology with them, right? So when somebody says AI, what the heck does that mean, right? If I'm in software, it probably means artificial intelligence. Maybe it means advanced industry grants. Maybe you're applying for an OEDIT grant. I don't know. I would tell you that I sat in a room where somebody said AI, and there were some ag tech investors there, and they got very confused. I found out later they were thinking it was artificial insemination. Just saying, right? Whenever you pitch these things, make sure you're using appropriate terminology to whoever you're talking to so you understand them. Okay. And then I'll just mention here a little bit around pitch versus send away decks. Gosh, whenever you're pitching, it really ought to be clean, optimized, right, for that presentation strategy. If you're sending away, many cases you may want to include a little bit more data or whatever that happens to be on slides, so you can kind of change that a little bit, but you just kind of be aware of, right, good pitch techniques versus good reading. The other thing I would say is that I think I've mentioned, right, I see a number of decks every day, and my eyes light up, right, when I can just simply say no. Makes my life very easy, right? And so I'll pick out, whatever the reason of the day is. I don't like to cut, no, I don't do that. But, right, if somebody makes it hard for me, right, it's very easy for me to just say, forget it. I'm going to go on to the next pitch deck here, right, and see what they have to offer. So whenever you're, pitching these things, whenever you're putting together your slide deck, I would absolutely encourage you to use very good slide etiquette, right? So, simple things, right? Numbering, your font sizes, your font colors, good spelling, all of that stuff. That's kind of the table stakes, I think, that Ben was talking about, right? Your baseline, right? You're not delighting anybody with that stuff. But I would tell you that if I get, something that just doesn't make sense, it's gone. I'm done. I'm moving on. And I probably have missed out on some great opportunities over the history just for those reasons. But it's a very easy way for me to say no. Think about, right, how much time you're going to have when you're talking to them, and appropriately structure the content so you're getting through everything that you need to get through. One of the suggestions I would have is that if there are things that maybe you kind of get frequently asked, have that in your slide deck later on, maybe as backup slides potentially. And so if you have extra time during the pitch, you can call those up and say, boy, you know what, I always seem to get these things. And here, let me touch on that. Maria, got your hand up. Hit me.
So as you were talking about best practices, I was thinking, the relationship seems to be a best practice. And so like you guys at Innosphere maybe have like that you can apply, and so you get like the send out, but how do we establish the relationship with investors? Like it seems like nowadays is like you apply, but in general that seems like a very obscure thing to me for people that we don't have like that type of network. Are we going to talk about that at some point? Or is this the right time to ask about that?
So there's a couple of aspects to that, I think, right? And so I'll just kind of touch on this right now. And in fact, I think we have Nathan from Founder Suite talking a little bit about, how do you make those connections later on? But at very high level, I would say that, one, I'm going to say 100% or nearly 100% of the time, if we get referrals from other portfolio companies, we're going to take those calls. We just are, right? Gosh, if we believed enough to write a big check to, our portfolio companies, I'm going to believe enough in them that if they're referring somebody that they understand what we're looking for and they're going to be a reasonable conversation with them. So to me, right, that's probably the best way to network into a venture capital firm. The other part, of course, is if you are already invested in or you have a good relationship with a venture capital firm, they certainly have a network, right, that they can make referrals to. So to me, those are kind of the two best ways, unless of course Aunt Susie works for one of them and you have a clear path there, then certainly take that one. But beyond that, right, even walking around, conferences, making some initial, small talk with them, even if they aren't a good fit for right now. So maybe they're a Series B and beyond investor, right? Why not start the conversation today? You can get them on their newsletter, et cetera, et cetera. You get them warm, so we're early stage investors. So, I don't necessarily worry about that. However, know a bunch of other investors, right, that they are later stage investors, and that's exactly how they like to see it, right? So, gosh, hey, yeah, put me in touch with them. I'll have a, maybe even a quick conversation with them today to find out what they're about, see if it potentially is a good fit, and then, yeah, we'll put them on kind of the warmer here for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever that happens to be, and continually give me updates. And if I'm seeing you making good progress, then they'll reach out to you in many cases. All right. Jaspal.
Just an observation based upon what Maria is asking. Sorry, I just came from New York last night, so you see some itchy throat. If you put some accredited investor who is part of a venture group, then that would make the introductions easier, because for my previous company, I have done that. And also, if you win an investment competition from a venture capital firm itself, then that also makes things easier. Then they will privately invite you to the meeting with the investors. So those were, I think, some shortcuts that I earlier did not know, because I won a competition from Elevate Ventures. Then their entire private network of 100 investors were applicable to me. But that's a whole different ball game, that how much money they will invest. That's a separate, but at least you have the ears available. And then also one accredited investor who is fairly substantially rich, that a few 40,000-50,000 is a small amount of them, and then they are very well connected to the investor community. So that's some ways to shortcut that, and we're willing to go beyond Colorado, because if you're going to operate in US, then you're going to be a national company. So that's some of the shortcuts and that you can share, that you can approach, and then those people will share things with you, how you can broach the market. So make early friends, accredited investors. That's what I did for my other startup, but I didn't know that, but that came towards the tail end. And now currently where the company stand is we are towards the phase 2 of the company, either get acquired or raise more capital. So
excellent. Very good ideas. Very good ideas, Jasper. Appreciate that. Yep. All right. So, all right. So here we go. Just, okay. Goals, right? So what I think about, right, as you put together the slide deck, and then we're going to get into the actual suggested slides, what should I be able to walk away from, right? It's basically the who, what, where, when, and why. You throw in some how. In some cases, you might get a why now type of question, right? That is appropriate. Certainly, if that makes sense, you can throw that in there too. But at the end of the day, right, after you put together your slide deck, it ought to answer all of these different questions, right? And I would say that if any one of these questions is unanswered, I think about it, right, as, well, I'm going to make up my own answer, potentially, and it's probably going to be wrong, but I'll make it up anyways. And so it's additional risk that's added to how I think about your company and your technology. And, the more risk that's there, the less likely that I'm going to, invest. And or if I am going to invest, then the terms are likely to be more onerous, right? Because I want a greater return. So in any case, I think getting to, hey, what do we think you ought to include? And I would tell you that in general, right, as I look at decks, these are the types of things that I am looking for. Now, I'm gonna say that this list is pretty comprehensive, I think. There, as I mentioned before, isn't necessarily a blueprint. Maybe this is more of a guide for what you're trying to do here. And what you focus on, I think, depends a little bit around what your company is trying to do. So let's take, for instance, regulatory pathway. If you're going 510K, clearly you have to talk about that in your slide deck, right? If you're just going and just registration or something like that, you don't have to spend a lot of time, right, going down that path. So I guess my point is, right, that as you look through some of these things, I think that in general they ought to be addressed, but where you're going to spend time as you go through your story and as you build out the case for somebody to invest in you, you're going to, tailor that to your specific opportunity. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about each one of these things. So problem opportunity, right? In most cases, this is where people start, right? They come in and they're going to tell us about this this particular problem, and generally, right, they start talking about hey, this is why I'm excited about this, right? You kind of get to, I'm passionate about this problem because of X, Y, and Z, and this really launches into a story, right? Why are you focused on this and not something else? And in many cases, if you're shifting, let's say, markets based on where you've built expertise previously, then this is always a question in the back of my mind where somebody is pitching, hey, wait a second, I'm going to solve, problem X, Y, and Z, but their history is over in markets A, B, and C. And I'm always wondering, well, why are you doing this? And why does it matter? And the whole thing, right? And so it always starts with questions there from me. So you have to talk a little bit about, hey, what's the problem and the opportunity, of course, around that? And why is this a particular passion of yours? Why are you involved in solving this problem? Okay. And so next thing is market. I think Ben just talked a lot about markets here. In general, right, we're going to say that investors will get excited about large market sizes, and let's claim $1 billion. And the reason is, economically speaking, it has to be that big, right, to get an economic return. And so, depending on the path you're taking, and if you're going to maybe just go FDA clearance, sell your med device, so maybe it's not as applicable here, but bear with me and let's walk through this a little bit. If you have, let's say, a $10 million valuation today, and I'm going to invest in you, I want a 10x return, your early stage, right? That's not at all unusual. 10x return, 5 years. So that means you need a $100 million exit at some point in the future, right? So if you were to think about what gets you to a $100 million valuation, well, let's just say very, very broadly, let's say you need 20 million in revenue, 5x multiple on revenue for $100 million. Certainly, depending on the path you take in, there may be other ways to get that valuation, but let's just assume that, right? If you're in a $100 million market and you have $20 million worth of revenue, well, you own 20% of the market. So if I'm thinking about acquisition, how I can grow this, there's limited upside potentially to that, right? And growing in that particular market. And so I may be looking for something else to say, hey, wait a second, I can get a much greater return if I go down this path over here because the market's $1 billion. And so, you know, you're not 20% of the market here. So just something to be, you know, thinking about, right? And as an investor, that's what we think about is, hey, market sizing. Yes, we'll talk a lot about, you know, why you think the market is that size. And I might even give you my 2 cents as to what size market I think it is. But arguably, that's really the reason why we always start talking about $1 billion as being the cutoff here. Okay. Next one really is around your solution, right? So this is where you can get really, you know, down in the weeds of, hey, wait a second, I'm really excited about this, and I'm going to solve this particular problem, and this is how I'm going to do it. And so that's great. And I would say that one thing that I see a lot of is, especially, you know, the science and tech folks, right? Technology is very exciting, and they're going to spend a lot of time talking about their technology. I love technology as much as the next person. However, I'm going to say this again. We invest in businesses. We don't invest in technologies, even deep tech when we say that, right? There's got to be an opportunity here to take this technology and ultimately make money out of it, right? So it is very important when I think about this, right, to be talking through, yes, this is your product roadmap, this is your regulatory strategy, right? This is your IP strategy, all of this good stuff. This all has to tie together, make sense, and it has to be able to roll into your overall business model. Okay, so again, I see a lot of folks, they spend a lot of time on this slide. I get it, it's very exciting, but you need to, as I mentioned very early on, you need to temper that excitement a little bit and continue on and hit the rest of the story for me. Okay, we need to get through the entire deck, the entire story. So, you know, there are a lot of things out here, right, that, you know, you certainly can go down this path, that path, whatever that happens to be. But make sure that, you know, this particular side, yes, get very excited about, but move on, right? Get the point across and move on. And then let me come back and ask you questions on it if I think that I didn't get the whole story. Okay. Certainly one of the, you know, big parts of how investors think about making their next investment is really around, you know, how do we understand what this particular technology, what this business is going to do in the marketplace? And I think, you know, we had some previous conversations, right, during Ben's session around who are you talking to? How do you get that feedback? What does that look like? How do you, you know, put that into play? What are the things around making sure that you have, or ultimately will get a product market fit? And there's a variety of different things, right? I mean, I think about here, certainly key opinion leaders, right? You can kind of throw that into, you know, traction, validation, whatever that happens to be. Very early on, right? You're talking about, you know, mouse studies, I don't know, whatever that happens to be. So be thinking about, right, what this traction is and how you can convey to an investor that, hey, wait a second, I'm making progress. And oh, by the way, there's an opportunity out there that that you ought to be interested in. And so, you know, I mean, there's some things on here that are probably less applicable to maybe what you're thinking about. Gosh, when I think about InteroTrack, I can only imagine what their net promoter score would be. Got to swallow something and then you got to pull it back up. I don't know about that one. So maybe that's not the right the measurement there. But anyways, moving on. Competition. Yeah. So this is a great spot, I think, for entrepreneurs to be able to kind of step back and say, you know what, investor, I know this space and I know it pretty darn well. And I'm going to display to you market knowledge here, right? And oh, by the way, right, you can ask me pretty much any question about the potential competition here, and I'm going to be able to respond to that. So that said, right, in many cases, you know, you would say that, boy, if there's no competition, that's a red flag. Absolutely, right? If you're going to tell me that there's nobody else out there doing this or solving this particular problem, I got to look at you and say, really? So this is a brand new problem that needs to be solved. Well, let's talk through that. And oh, by the way, if it's that big of a problem in that big of a market, then why is nobody else trying to solve the same problem, right? I mean, naturally, capital flows to companies that are solving big problems in big markets. So we're going to have a conversation about that. As well as, hey, if there's too much competition, right? So then we're going to have to start to have a conversation about, well, wait a second, how are you going to differentiate in the marketplace, right? And you go down that path. So, there certainly is, in my mind, a little bit of a sweet spot here. There's disruptive technologies out there. So when I think through the types of technologies that I get to be exposed to virtually every day, I start to think about, hey, how is this particular technology going to disrupt, maybe something else that's already out there in the marketplace, right? So somebody comes to me with a better mousetrap. I say, whoa, hold on a second. Maybe they're coming to me with a better camera, right? Better SLR. I look at them and say, well, wait a second. 20 years ago, Apple started with this iPhone, and boy, there's a camera in there. No one was really thinking about disruption in the camera market at the time. They say, we're going to have a camera in our pocket, and everybody's be walking around with that. So to me, it's kind of interesting that you have to think a little bit beyond what's out there in the marketplace today and kind of skate to where the puck is going to be, right? To understand, hey, what is that whole breadth of technology that's being brought to bear, and how is it going to disrupt a marketplace that just doesn't seem like it's a natural extension of what we're trying to do today. All right, so when you put it all together, right, you have a business model, and you have to really be able to explain to folks, right, how is this business going to generate revenue? How are you going to make money? All the different parts that we've gone through, and we got a couple more slides, it all has to fit into this business model and make a good story. It all has to make sense, right? And so if you're going to outsource manufacturing, I get it. How does that affect your margins here, right? What does that mean? How are you going to convince, right, your buyers to write you a check? And is it a one-time check? Is it a recurring check? What does your model look like? How do I think about your particular business? Sometimes I get very confused by folks that come in with 2, 3, 4, 5 different potential revenue streams, and by the end of the conversation, I have to kind of take a step back and say, well, okay, hold on a second. Let's talk through what your company really is at the core, and be able to think through that. And so that helps me then frame, well, wait a second, now I need to think about this as a medical device company. It's not a decision support software company, right? Or whatever that happens to be. And so that has broader implications then of what we're trying to do. And certainly there's opportunities to potentially differentiate right on the business model. That's constantly evolving. So, I think we kind of talked a little bit about business models previously, but yeah, what does that look like? Kevin mentioned bundling, for instance, right? How do you compete against folks that are bundling stuff? What is your business model that looks attractive for us? So, so understanding that is pretty key. And then, of course, hey, as you're thinking about your business model and how you're going to make money, talk me through, right? What does that look like? Now, if you're in medical device space, right, then maybe revenue is pretty darn low here for the first 3-4 years, and so you're going to have to fill that gap some other way. But then you ought to have a pretty accurate budget right here of what we're talking about. So things like that. Now, one thing I would say is that although you may be thinking about, hey, wait a second, all I'm going to do is go through FDA clearance and I'm selling my business and I'm out. So I'm not really going to, if I have any revenue, it'll just be initial revenue. That's fine. But I'm going to ask you questions about, hey, wait a second, how does this fit into somebody else's portfolio? You're going to come to me and say, what? Hey, Medtronic wants to buy me. Well, I say, great. That's fantastic. Love it. how does this affect them? What revenue levels can they get to, and what's the margins on that? Because if you're not margin accretive, or you're not going to a space that makes sense for them, what's the incentive to buy you? So I start thinking about exit strategy, right? So these financial projections, yes, include you, but they have to make sense to somebody that's going to buy it. And that's how I think about it, right? Hey, yeah, I get it. Y'all are going to be struggling the first couple of years, right, to make payroll and all the rest of this stuff. Totally understand. But what's that next step? So even if you're not going to get into revenue, what does this look like? What does this financial projection look like for your potential exit strategy? So anyways, I think this is certainly pretty critical to have ultimately in a slide deck. Certainly, right, as folks, or as you go off and ask for money, right, to raise money to fund the growth of your company here, we're gonna definitely want to know what the raise is used for, right? And I go back to the previous slide around your pro forma. That explains to me how much capital you're going to need. This explains to me how are you going to fill that gap in capital needs, right? So again, these things have to be tied together. And then understanding, hey, wait a second, there's a natural progression here of how I'm going to go off and raise capital. And so anyways, just be thinking about that. Kevin, looks like you got something to say.
Yeah, it was actually on your last slide on financial projections. And
Yeah.
one of the key things that is a little bit different in the life science area that people need to be thinking about early is their reimbursement strategy. How to talk about that reimbursement strategy and convey that you've done more than find a code that might fit what you do, because that ties in a big way to the believability of your revenue and the fact that people will move. So, it's a big thing in doing. We just did the OEdit reviews last week of companies, and when people don't understand that, they usually fall pretty quickly. So make sure you're thinking about your reimbursement strategy and you're kind of pressure testing it to see that it works to support the revenue flow that you're communicating.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point, Kevin. Oh, the other Kevin. Kevin 2.0.
I was going to ask a quick question, but I'm happy to save it to the end if you want to.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I think 3 more slides.
Is it acceptable if you have a gap in some of this information, or maybe a thin spot, we'll call it that, in some of the information you're presenting, and maybe someone in the audience even brings it up, is it ever acceptable to say, that's where I'd like your help? Because if you partner with us and you come onto the board, your expertise will help us cover the gap that you just mentioned. It seems like a way to handle acknowledging a thin spot and saying, I sure hope, to bring in an expert, and it just might be you. Or does that come across as cheesy and weird?
So no, right? I would say that I think that's reasonable, and I've seen it done before. However, what I would do is, if there is a gap in there, I would start out with, hey, this is how we have thought about it. This is the steps we've taken. So you kind of give them at least a little bit of an idea that boy, I know this is a gap. We just haven't gotten around to it. We don't have the right person on the team, or whatever that happens to be, right? And then you can walk them down the path of, yeah, this is the type of, the next step that we're going to get to, and you can tell that story. And whether or not it's that person in the audience or otherwise, I don't know. But absolutely, I would say that 100%. And I would, let me move to the next slide here, because I think this does a really nice job, right? Around, boy, if you have a team, clearly as a early stage startup, you're going to have gaps in, the skills on the team, right? So boy, maybe your next step is to bring on board, right, the next biz dev person. I get it. You're not at a stage in the company where that's necessarily needed. So, 5 months from now, you're going to bring those on. But when you start talking about, hey, yeah, I have a gap here, and this is our strategy to approach it, and then maybe there is an ask there of the audience member to, help out in that particular sense. But I think this is a great example because to me, there's a lot of, self-reflection and understanding of where your skills reside, where they end, and then what need you have. And so, to me, it would be, yeah, I got this gap. I need, person X, Y, and Z with these set of skills. Oh, by the way, I mean, the next good step is once we raise this round, then I'm going to be able to bring this person on and fill that gap. And, then we can move forward to the next, whatever milestones that we have that are out there. And so, yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, whenever I hear a pitch, I will end the pitch with, hey, what are you looking for in an investor? If they haven't told me that throughout the course of the pitch, right? So maybe they've already done what exactly you're saying. You know what, Tim? We have a gap in commercializing technology here in the US because I invest in Israeli companies, right? Well, okay, great. So what sort of networks are you looking for? How do you want, help doing that? And do we have the expertise to be able to help you on that one? And can we align? And if we can, great. If we can't, then maybe we're not the right investor for you, quite frankly. But yeah, I mean, I would not have any issues whatsoever, presenting it how you're presenting it, maybe just with a little bit, additional context behind the ask.
Okay, thank you.
Right? Yep.
Hey Tim, are you suggesting we emulate any of these individuals shown here to successful?
Yeah, should I go back and well, we probably don't need to get into a conversation about that, but you're right. Do I have to give credit to them that I put them on a slide like this? I'm not sure. Yeah, so one of the last things here is really around, exit strategy. This seems to be one of the more controversial topics, right, for folks to include or not include, quite frankly. To me, I don't believe that it's ever too early to talk about an exit strategy, right? The old Stephen Covey thing, beginning with the end in mind. Get it? I've seen companies that have, gone so far as brand themselves with similar colors or complementary colors to a company they want to get bought by, and they actually get bought by that company, so that was good. But again, it's one of those things where, to me, what it helps with is that, hey, maybe Medtronic is the right organization to buy your company. Maybe they aren't, I don't know, but maybe they are. But let's assume that they are. They have a particular strategy around the types of companies that they go off and acquire, right? And so if you know that, then you can go back to the rest of your slide deck and say, yeah, to be able to get to that particular point of acquisition by Medtronic, I need to build a company that looks like this, right? And then you might say, well, gosh, I'm not going to build out the manufacturing line. I'm going to contract that. I'm not going to build out my sales team. I'm going to contract that because Medtronic, when they buy me, they're just going to, overlay what they have already and leverage what they do, versus what maybe I bring to the table. And so to me, right, why spend time doing that? And then you focus on other things that make you more valuable to these things. As well as, hey, if you have an active acquisition space, I think that, that brings, or that gains the attention of investors. And I typically would see that in, much more kind of the angel type of organizations where maybe they don't have access to the same tools, databases, knowledge around particular spaces that maybe institutional investors have. And then the final slide, I would say that, whenever you're doing a pitch, definitely, have a final slide, but think about using that real estate for something that is productive. And what I mean by that is, why not highlight, right, 4, 5, 6 different things that are great about your company? Maybe even the ask, right, or whatever that happens to be. This screen may be up there, or that slide may be up there for a while, right, while you're continuing to talk about the business, answer questions, things like that. So why not use it? And then, of course, my parting comment there is, hey, think about that for the first slide too, because your first slide may be up a little bit longer than normal too, right? So how do you use that advantageously for your particular business?